G'day listeners and welcome to another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast powered by Australian Broadcast Scout by Agency. I'm your host, Sammy Gordon, and today, guys, I'm joined in the studio by two fan favourites. I have the producer, Kelly, sitting over there, and big Lukey Teeuwsen. Lukey, mate, welcome back. How are you?
Good to be here. Lovely GC. Good weekend ahead. I'm actually on the GC for a few days, Sammy, so we'll be here for a while. I've brought my bag, so I'm packing. I'm setting up shop, and I'm not leaving.
There we go. You're not leaving. I'm not leaving. I went straight into it. But also in the studio, not one of the fan favourites, but a man that I do love dearly, Mr. Big Jimmy Ibrahim, mate. Welcome back.
G'day, listeners. G'day, Sammy. And g'day, Lukey. When you said that, Lukey, I was curious. How Talia with the kids on her own over the weekend? Do you feel guilt at all? Or you like? I thought you were Father of the Year.
I feel a little bit guilty.
Just a little.
I do, yeah, absolutely. But Talia's a great mother. I back her with 100% confidence.
Wow.
I know she will hold the fort down better than anyone else, so I trust her.
Oh, he's doubled down.
Wow.
Dude, look at that smile. Look at the grin.
She's never gone on a weekend, so weekend away. So what does that say about you?
I dare say she could have a holiday for the Bucks weekend.
Yeah, you should get a real expensive gift, I
Boys,
reckon.
I'm pumped to have you both in the studio. We've got a couple of cool things to talk about today. There's some big things that have been going on in the headlines as of late. I did a weekly news bulletin on this several weeks ago, and I wanted to discuss with you today, should we be letting, or should investors let government policies dictate how they invest? And obviously, there's so many different things get thrown around. There's different policies. You've got land tax, you've got negative gearing, you've got capital gains tax, you've got state and federal taxes and policies that come in and out continually. So what I wanted to talk to you two boys about really was what's going on in the market right now, what's being spoken about, and should you ever let government policies dictate? And this is the biggest thing, is government policies that are in talks about, right? Should you let them really dictate the way you invest? Lukey, I want to throw it to you first, man. Like, what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would say is it depends how you sort of phrase the question. Should you let it stop you investing? No, absolutely not. Should you be aware of government changes? Should you be up to date with things that happen in the market across not only government policies, but banking changes, different things on the tax side of things, government policies? Absolutely. If you're an investor and you're doing this long term, it's your job to be up to date with
part
of
being a
stuff.
Strategic investor, right, is understanding what's going on and investing accordingly.
Correct. But should it stop you from investing at any point? Absolutely not. So when we were talking about this, off air, I think the biggest thing for us is, would you let the government making one change 1 year stop you from getting to your goals? So I wanted to sort of take it back to the purpose of why you're doing it in the first place. Why are you investing? Is it to get into your first house and have the dream house, or get out of work and retire? There's always going to be changes along the way, whether it be on the tax side of things, the government policies, lending things. These things you should be aware of, but they shouldn't ever halter your progress in your investing journey. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because the thing I love about learning from you, Sammy, and this podcast that delivers a lot for all of our listeners is the fundamentals don't lie, right? And when we're looking at market fundamentals, demand and supply, infrastructure developments and population growth, we're not really concerning ourselves specifically with what the government's doing. Whereas when you think of back governments, and unfortunately some of the governments, they're relatively short-term policies because people are trying to get into power. So it can fluctuate back and forth. And if you use that as a basis, you're really making really short-term decisions. So the thing I love about the education that we give is giving people a bit of a broader spectrum and a broader focus, and trying not to let the government dictate what you should do. Now, does government policy impact property? Then yes. I mean, you could argue, of course, but should it impact our investing and our strategy? Well, then that's debatable, and I think that's what we're trying to inform people today.
Well, I think part of being a strategic investor, and being part of a strategic investor, is always being willing to be, like fluid with your strategy and what you might have to do. So, like, when you kind of say around that, like, I would say yes, 100%. Like, it can potentially impact your strategy if there's things that impact things from a cash flow perspective or investing moving forward. If big changes come through, it is something very much to bring into the equation. And this is going to lead into one of my key points I'm talking about, or want to talk about here. but it's things that are actually talked about and things that are actually implemented, right? So proposed changes compared to implemented changes. And a lot of the time we see things brought up, discussions brought up, and you look at over the very long term, you look at things like the 2019 election. It was literally just the election, but the housing market almost went on hold for like it was a minimum 3 months, might have even been a little bit longer before that, because there was so many proposed changes that were potentially going to come in that a lot of people sat on the sidelines. Some of the best buying that I ever did in my career of investing was literally in that time frame because the market was dead. And then that government didn't actually get in, and then the market went crazy. And we've seen it happen so many times with so many different things. When these changes come in or events happen, all these different things, even look at COVID, people who were ballsy enough to get in there and make those decisions during that time frame, some of the best buying ever. And then obviously the growth that came after it, again, some of the best growth that's ever been seen in the market too. So I think it always comes down to the level of risk an investor is willing to take, but it's also really weighing things up with your head screwed on in the sense of well, has this actually been implemented? Or is it just proposed? And then if it's proposed, how much will it actually impact the market? Or if it has been brought in, how much is it impacting the market? And then investing off the back of it. Again, we look back to say Queensland when they changed the land tax, I think it was in 2022, it changed for 91 days, right? So that they changed the land tax idea. It was a crazy bullish thing that they tried to bring in. It was never really going to stick. I was one of the very few that came out openly and said, I don't think this is going to stay because this is too much hullabaloo, too many people exiting Queensland. Investors have completely died off. It was that dip that came during that window was crazy. You know what I mean? And even from that, in that sense, it took a while for it to recover after this fact. But after 91 days, they actually changed the policy because it had affected the market so much. There was so much change in sentiment at that time. So, man, I think it's one of these things you just have to really, yes, we want to be aware of it within our strategy, but it can't be the be-all, end-all of making decisions. Even things like talking about the negative gearing, the capital gains tax changes and all the rest of the sort of stuff, they've been talking about this stuff for years. One of the biggest things I said in that news bulletin back in a few weeks ago was really around how, the Labor government lost the 16 and 19 elections talking about this stuff, and it was going to be one of their major policies. They literally lost the election because of it, because there were so many people who had held onto property for so long, taking a loss for so long. They're hang on a sec, the only way I'm keeping my head above water holding this asset is with this policy, and now you're going to pull it away from me after I've held onto it for this long. And I believe it was this huge swing that came off the back of that as well. So it's one of these things yes, you want to factor it into your strategy and factor it into what you're doing, but you've just got to still keep moving forward because over the long term, property will always perform. And when the market fundamentals are in our favor, we're still always going to have a win off the back of that as well.
I think as well, governments lie as well. So they may get in on the back of a policy or a proposed policy, and one, it never comes to fruition, or they change it. The most recent example of that is stage 3 tax cuts. You know, they quite openly came out and said that there would be no changes to it. We have no planned changes. We don't want to do anything to it. And they changed it. So
just before it happened.
this is literally an example just recently. So at the end of the day, you don't actually know. And the flip side of it is how potential government policies can influence markets in a positive way as well. So when you look at COVID and the market starting to halt, and they brought out those builder bonuses and those incentives to kickstart the economy again, they got people into building houses, which obviously created jobs and created stock on market. But that's the other side of how policy change can affect the property market. It's not always good. It's not always bad. So you just have to be aware of these things and actually how it's going to impact the market, and also not just the market, your portfolio yourself.
What's your view, Sammy, on some of the policies from governments in relation to, there's a lot of investors who love NDIS properties or NRAS, and what's your view on that, and whether investors should capitalize on those government policies or avoid them?
Man, I think one of the biggest things is being very wary of something that's might be a great return in the short. It might be a great return in the short term, in the short time frame. But as a long term, is it a long term solution? You look at NRAS and other programs that have been brought in over time to try and help boost affordability and all those sort of things, man, they always fail. You know what I mean? They're never something that's overly taken up. They always get wound down over time as well. You look at the building code that they're bringing in now. They're bringing in, when we flip the script and start looking at NDIS, they're actually bringing in a lot of building codes that are changing to make almost all homes available for things like wheelchair access and disability and all this sort of stuff. It's literally becoming part of the norm in terms of building code. So how long is it until that is actually going to be replaced? Like the significant rents that are in that space. How long until that's actually replaced and become null and void when almost every house is built to the same spec in Australia? I think it's only a matter of time before that is no longer a popular thing and is no longer something that actually solves a problem in the market. But the crazy thing is, like, people are going out there spending like $1.5 million on the sector building a house that may become like a null and void product in a period of time too. So I'm always extremely skeptical of things like that in terms of their long-term solution out there in the marketplace. And I wouldn't say that I actually understand the product like very, very like super deeply from that perspective as well. But the government aren't going to shell out like huge money continuously for an extremely long period of time if there's other ways they can bring about change from it and save themselves a significant amount of money. There's always these little loopholes and windows of opportunity, but do they last forever? No. And this is one of the other things that I firmly believe is not going to last forever. Whereas when you stick to fundamental assets, good, strong, cash flowing assets, and that's the product. Yes, they may not shoot the lights out in terms of like a ridiculous return. The returns might still be good or great. They may not be ridiculous, but can ridiculous be sustained? That's something that I'd really challenge from that perspective as well.
Okay. When you look at Victoria, right, so government policy and change in policy has had a big flow-on effect with additional land taxes. And would there ever be a point that you would prevent yourself from investing or slow down or stop investing based on government policy?
Well, there's always other places to go. So just because something got changed, and like you look at the land tax changes and the rental reform, like the double whammy, the old 1-2, the old 1-2 uppercut when you bring Dan Andrews into the equation, right? The three atrocities that have happened in the last couple of years in the Victorian market. And man, when you sort of bring that into the equation and then you look at, okay, well, the market's fallen across most of the state by 10 to 20% over the past 12 months alone. It's like, well, that has had a significant impact on the market. But again, will it stay like that forever? No, there'll be a fall point where it then becomes like it'll flatline and then it'll bottom out, and then there'll be its period whenever its time comes for growth again as well. But man, there's always other opportunities. Like you look at the last 12 months in Victoria, if you were the buy and hold forever and never sell out of it, market when you make good growth or go to different areas and you'd stayed in there, you might be 10 to 20% down this year, where a lot of our investors in other locations are up 20, 30, 40% plus this year. So just because policy change didn't make it a good idea to invest in Victoria for the past 12 to 24 months, it doesn't mean that there weren't other markets you can make significant gains in. So, man, this is where, to me, it's just like having a good holistic approach, a good holistic look at the entire market as a whole, states as a whole, because as we know, states they all have different, regulations, land tax, stamp duties, all these sorts of things like that as well. There's heaps of different things that they all have that are intimate to themselves. And when policy change comes around that, rental reforms is another one, obviously, that we've seen. When policy changes come around that, it can significantly change the market, like we've seen in that location the past 12 months.
But there is a notion out there that governments are supposed to make housing affordable for the population, Lukey. And I know that you've written you were talking about this before. What's your views on the government and their impact on making housing affordable?
I think when you look at like of course, when you look at the population, you're not going to always have homeowners, investors. You're going to have people that are lifelong renters and people that not even renting. They're in housing commission, so they're not actually paying any rent. So there's such a diverse sort of cross between the entire population. When you look at the government do not have the funding capability or knowledge to fix the housing crisis. They very much...
It's almost like a novice investor trying to play an advanced investor's game, right? They don't have the funding, nor do they have the experience to actually be able to solve that problem.
Yeah, correct.
Sammy Gordon, 2025, independent MP.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Sammy. The reason why I asked that question was exactly because I knew you'd jump out of the boat and get straight on the hook. Because if you didn't hear it, ladies and gents, Sammy is quietly thinking about making a run for government.
Big changes coming, guys.
I said, what, the mayor? And he goes, nah. And I went, what, state? He goes, nah. And he's like, and he goes, Prime Minister? I don't want to do anything, but I'm just going to go straight to the top job.
Yeah, straight to the top, independent.
I reckon we'd fix a few problems. But like
back to the point.
When you look at it, though, they don't. Like, exactly right. It's a novice investor playing seasoned investor game. But I feel like the government are not actually able to fix the problem. So why would you basically push investors away that are fixing the problem? Like when you look at holiday rentals, short-term rentals, long-term rentals. Then they've got housing commission, affordable housing. They can't fix all of different sectors. Like property is split up into so many different types. They need private investment to bring short-term holiday rentals and long-term rentals. They can't do it all.
The biggest issue with this of like the federal government trying to get involved is like they also have an extremely vested interest. The housing market, right? One of the biggest, literally is probably the biggest, if I think it's the second biggest or the biggest employer in the country when you bring everything into the equation. The issue with trying to create or trying to make housing affordable is they literally would need to stall that sector of the market so the average Australian could try and play catch up and get into it, right? But the issue with it, because they would need to stall the construction, this is actually the thing. You can't stall the construction sector because you've like stalling the construction sector creates a shortage, which is what we're in at the moment, which is a housing crisis. You know what I mean? There's no definitive way they can kind of solve it with what they're trying to do and trying to bring this certain amount of housing into the market, right? It just doesn't make sense the way they did it. Because they did this huge influx of immigration, but they didn't make it specific to who they needed, which was trades. And they could have made something around trade apprenticeships that got more people out there into the workforce. Didn't do that either. And so they brought in this huge amount of people to create this massive additional demand for housing. And then they closed it off without bringing the people they needed to do. And then they're not cutting red tape. They're not creating any actual solution in terms of how to bring more houses to the market. So trying to create affordable housing, it's not really like a government policy that can be brought in. You can't really bring in, or how do we create affordable housing? It's not really so much something that can be brought in because the market will always outpace sort of the bottom end of what is considered affordable. Let me ask you this, Jimmy. Why do you say the government is trying to create affordable housing?
I think what I was referring to, Sammy, more so is the government's trying to build a certain amount of homes to give. The great Australian dream is to own your own home. Yep. So they're trying to build more homes for people to get into their house, right? Because they feel like they're getting ahead. So my question to you boys was, government, their policies, isn't that designed to actually stimulate that, to get people into their own home? And it needs to be affordable for the average person to get into there.
It doesn't need to be affordable. And I think this is the biggest thing is like build prices have gone on the biggest run we've seen in decades in the last 2 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years, right? Since COVID, there's a massive shortage, labor shortage, material shortage. Housing has gone on the biggest run. And the biggest thing to remember here is the housing market and the real estate sector across Australia, the real estate industry is the largest employer of all industries in Australia, right? So you're trying to take that now to a level that has never been before, to create more homes than it has ever produced before, and to produce that 5 years in a row to try and hit this 1.2 million home target in the next 5 years. We fell 90,000 homes short in the first year. So we fell woefully short, right? 40% short in that first year. It's not going to happen. What you have to remember is it's not affordable housing that's going to be created from, right? If it's a bigger sector and they need to ramp it up to get it to that next level, you're not going to be slowing down that sector. You're ramping that sector up, which means it's going to get more expensive from that side, because trying to bring more homes to market with not having as many trades, not having as much material, that means all those things are more expensive. You're trying to get it through, right? For one, they're never going to meet that housing target, but this is where they're just going to fall woefully short from this side of things. And everything they're going to try and do to push this thing is not going to make housing any more affordable.
Is it going to get people into their own homes though?
This is a thing, but it's like it's not going to change anything. It's the people at that price point. Realistically, like it's not just homes they need to sort of bring into the equation. It's not just people's homes in terms of ownership. It's also the rental side. We're in a massive rental crisis, man. Like rental crisis has been in effect since probably 2021 across most of the country. 2020 was the final straw for a lot of investors that had held for a long time, and a lot of people that had all the debate around negative gearing, and then the housing market was they were told by a current affair was going to tank by 40%. And so a lot of people exited during that time frame. It was a ridiculously good buying window for investors who had the cojones enough to take it on and go out there and buy. But what it did was massively deplete stock out there in the marketplace from a rental side, because so many investors opted out. And man, that has never been replenished. We have not replenished that yet. So, this is the thing of them. They're just trying to bring things back to an equilibrium point. But the hardest part of it is that projects still aren't stacking up because build prices are so expensive. And the more that we ramp it, the more expensive it gets, and the further away from it we get. This is why, like I mention this frequently, but like this, I reference back to the Super Boom episode. That is like, in my opinion, it's still in full effect. We're still going to be in a housing crisis for the next couple of years. It's not going to solve itself. Affordability caps is what will cap out most markets. But man, the surge that we've seen this year, like we're at the end of October, 2024. We're pretty much 10 months into 10 months into the year. And, man, some of these markets have done like 40, 50% growth this year alone. Like super boom's in full effect, man. It's crazy out there.
So
there's no one basically monitoring who gets these $1.2 million homes too. There's no guarantee that they all go to first home buyers like cracking into the market. There's a good chance they go to a good portion of investors, and depending on the market, it depends on the price point. Some of these new builds would be on the more expensive end in some of these markets across New South Wales, Victoria. So it might be people upgrading, and then there's still no guarantee that the person that gets the house they sold is going to be a first home buyer. So it doesn't necessarily guarantee that first home buyers buying in.
I think if we bring it right back to what we're actually talking about, right, which is policy change. Like if we look at the conversation that we just had then, right,
Yeah.
and then if we look at it against the biggest thing, the hottest topic that's on the table at the moment, which is negative gearing.
Yeah.
And I know I went into this a few weeks ago in the weekly news bulletin, okay? But like the biggest thing to throw into the equation with this is if they scrap negative gearing, there are going to be so many investors that either opt out. It depends how it's brought in. If it's grandfathered, it will keep it from being a full bloodbath, right? But if it's not grandfathered, the amount of people that will exit out of the market, for one, we will see a dip in values in a lot of areas, especially like your blue chip sort of guy. If you can't negatively geared, right, your blue chip markets, they're going to have no rental stock because everyone's going to need to opt out because their land tax bills are huge. The land tax bill is not going to change, but now they're not going to be able to write it off. The huge negative cash flow losses that they're going to have in their portfolio per property, they aren't going to be able to write it off. Man, it'll be decimated. The rental markets will be decimated across the country. But here's what to throw into the equation. If you were able to hold for a 6 to 12, let's say for a 12-month window where that first net loss period happened, and I'm not talking your blue chips because it's not, you're going to get hammered like on that end. It's not going to balance itself out enough, right? But if we're talking outside of that, and we're talking, blue collar up to probably like the middle tier of the market. Let's take out the top 25 percentile. I believe the bottom 75 percentile, that whole market will go through the whole market will go through a crazy rental jump, probably in around about that 12-month window because so much stock will be depleted. But it just, in my opinion, the top 25 percentile still won't be worthwhile to invest in. But that remaining amount, man, the amount of rental growth it will have, it will negate the negative gearing idea anyway. So even though they think they're going to bring about affordable housing and they're going to bring more people can get into their own homes and all the rest of it, what are the people who aren't able to make the jump yet and are renters? Let's think about the people who are out there renting in their teens, 20s, 30s maybe, and they've never bought a home before. And there's people older than that are still aspiring, obviously, homeowners. Man, it's only going to get significantly harder for them because what will happen in that time, that transitionary change, is more investors are going to opt out of the market, which is going to drive rents up because there's less people holding there, more demand, supply and demand imbalance. Rents will go up. It's also going to cost more for a property owner to hold property because they aren't going to be able to write off their net costs. Rents are going to go crazy. Rents are going to go absolutely through the roof. So, even if they were to bring that in, such a drastic, crazy change, the rental growth change that we'll see off the back of it as well would be wild. You know what I mean? Would be so worth holding. So it's like so worth kind of still investing and going through it. So this is one of the things that even though it would be a drastic change from a policy position and a policy perspective, as an investor, it actually, especially when I look at 12, 24 months after the fact, you're going to be in such a better position because, okay, you can't write this stuff off. But now you're $5,000 a year positive because you've had, or maybe you're 10, 15 grand a year positive now because your rents have just gone on a 50% surge in this time frame.
Can we just step this out for people that are following this, that are just a little bit confused as to why that happens, right? So because they're scrapping negative gearing, right? They're scrapping negative gearing.
Which negative gearing is your ability to write off losses against a property.
Yes.
So if you're losing $10,000 a year and you're in the 35-cent tax bracket, you can write that $10,000 off and get $3,500 back, right? So you're 35%, you get that back.
Yes. So
and that's how most negative geared investors keep their heads above water over the course of a year.
So they are going to sell their property because they're not getting the tax benefit, right? So they're going to sell that property.
Yep.
And what the government is assuming that now someone is going to be able to buy that property. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so that's going to be a homeowner. That's not going to be someone who's going to, as an investor, to then rent it out to someone else because they're not going to get the benefit either, right? So by doing that, is the government assuming that people who are currently renting will be able to make that leap and jump into buying that house?
That's a very large assumption. Yes,
but that's what they're assuming. Whereas what you're saying is most people won't be able to make that jump, right? So the house prices are going to fall. people are going to buy these houses that can afford them, but then the rental stock is going to be lesser and depleted, which is driving up the demand for the rent. Is that right?
Well, yes, to an extent, but like I wouldn't say so much that prices are going to significantly fall because there will be a transitionary period. I think there'll be a dip, but I think what will change is like I don't think house prices will change that much. I do believe there'll be a bit of a dip because there will be more people going to market that can't hold that product. There'll be a changeover, like a changing of the posts. And let's say it eats 50% of rental stock in that area. If you were sitting at a 25 to 30% rental to owner occupied ratio, so 70 to 75% of owner occs, now you're at a 10 to 12% rental stock in that market, which is ridiculously tight. Even if you were at a 60-40, so 60% owner occupier, 40% rental stock, and then that halved and went down to 20%. Dude, what a rent's going to do? It's only going to go one way. It's going to go on a massive jump, which will create this massive wealth gap. That, like, if people talk about the wealth gap that's being created in Australia, take away the ability for the next generation to ever be able to buy a home, that's it. Because you pull that off the table and then all of a sudden their rents go up 50% or more. How are they ever going to be able to afford to buy a house when they were renting for 600 and now it's 900 to 1,000 because you've just taken away 50% or more of the rental pool? Like the fastest way to create a wealth gap in Australia is scrap things like this that pull investors out of the market. There's not enough social housing in Australia, right? There's not enough. There's not enough social housing, right? So if they can't provide enough social housing, who's it being provided by? It's being provided by private investors. If you disincentivize all these guys, and just remember, 90% of property owners, of property investors in Australia own one or two properties. You're talking one or two properties. 90% of investors in Australia. If those guys can no longer hold, or it doesn't make sense for them to hold anymore, and then they tap out, man, like, are you kidding? Like the jump that's going to happen in rents for everyone else. And then so what you're actually incentivizing is the multi property owners of 3 to 6, 10 plus property owners. They potentially have the buffers to hold. They're okay. They understand it more from investing game. They're going to get a huge rental rise from that perspective. And the rent returns are going to be massive, man. It will create a massive wealth gap in Australia if they bring something like this in. It doesn't make sense, man. It does not make sense because you're going to change a policy that's 50 years old that the entire current Australian economy and housing market has been built on, because 30% plus of Australian homes are rented. You're going to wipe out a huge portion of that. The market will completely change.
So it's almost like the government is going to help a certain segment to actually be able to buy their home, but then they're going to really screw up another segment.
They're going to screw up another generation, man.
Okay, so what if...
Like, does that make sense? Me
No,
walking
100%.
out like that.
Yeah,
when
that
they
was really helpful.
Dude, supply and demand. As soon as they take out a huge amount of stock out of the market, bang, rents will rise. Game over. My
next question, though, just before that, Lukey, what if they were able to implement a cap on rents as well at the same time?
Okay, then you know what you're going to get? You're going to get another 50% of the market that's going to pull out. You're going to be left with 1 or 2%. They can't fully cap rents. You know what I mean? They can't go, you can't raise rents for 3 years, whatever. Because what will happen in 3 years' time, either there's going to be no rents on the market, because then what about if people can't afford to hold it? Are they then also going to go, oh, you also can't sell it in this time frame? Okay, sweet. Now then 90% of Australians own that property. Now let's go fucking bankrupt because they can't afford to hold it. Because so you're going to take money out of my pocket from the negative gearing, and you're going to cap my rents, and you're going to cap me from being able to sell it because there's a tenant in there? Mad, well, I'll declare bankruptcy because you've just fucked me.
That's bloody complicated, isn't it? Jeez, what?
That's why it's so complicated, because it's a fucking 50-year-old fucking policy. You can't just go playing with it. It's like, oh, we're going to scrap this, scrap this, scrap that. You will fuck the market. Guaranteed. This is where it has to be. If something's going to be changed, it has to be changed so slowly and in so many stages, because if they just talk about this and all these idiots going out there, fuck the investors, mate, 30% or more of the housing market is owned by private investors who don't have huge portfolios. 90% of homeowners own 1 or 2 properties. You are going to be doing yourself out. You're literally, the wealth gap will go crazy. It will be massive. And the people who are already in the game, who are the ones that everyone wants to hurt, they're not the ones that are going to be hurt.
Why isn't that more known in the general media or population? Because most people don't understand that. Most people think...
Okay, that's your exact reason.
Yeah.
Because most people don't understand it.
Yeah.
It's fear-mongering. 100% fear-mongering.
100%, man.
I think I want to use your example that you said before, and it ties into what you were saying. When Sammy was saying, if you're 10 grand negative on a property and you're in the 35% tax bracket, you write that off on your tax return and you get $3,500 back. If they scrap that, you're down $3,500. Now, what do I need to do to cover that $3,500? Do I need to raise how much do I need to raise my rent to cover that? Well, $3,500 divided by 52 is roughly $70 a week. do most tenants have an extra $70 a week? If across the board, all of those investors that lost negative gearing, and not all properties are 10 grand negative. If they're 10, 15, 20, 30 grand, it may be a larger rental increase.
And what about if they have multiple properties as well? If they have multiple properties, you're literally talking about just depleting rental stock.
Yeah, and that's based on a 10 grand example. So a 10 grand negative gearing loss is $70 extra a week on that one property. And then you go compound that across the entire market. And a lot of those blue chip properties in New South Wales and Victoria, 40, 50, 60 grand, some of them we see?
Yeah, 100%.
So, you go and times that by 6, the rent has to go up. Otherwise, people can't afford to happen. And there's your sort of Armageddon situation that Sammy talked about. It's ludicrous. It honestly doesn't make sense.
So you see another opportunity, Sammy, leading up to the election, the same thing as what happened in 2019 around negative gearing, where Bill Shorten, the unlosable election. Do you see the same window of opportunity again for people to really capitalise on that? If they keep pushing the way they're going
to be pushing now, then 100%.
And you think people should be backing themselves in that this... I mean, nothing's 100% certain, but...
Nothing's 100% certain, but think of the simple metrics of what I went through just then, and like what will be changed from that perspective. If they scrap it the way they're talking about scrapping it, which is just completely, it will have a profound effect on the market. It will have a monster effect on the market that everyone will feel. As investors, we will, investors, long-term investors, hold cash flows for long-term. We're going to feel it in the correct way. We're going to feel good, solid, positive cash flow when rents rise from that perspective. But all the aspiring people out there just literally just trying to buy their own homes. I'm just going to I've got to rent for 3 years, and I've been budgeting, and I'll be able to save this much each year. And then by the time I'm at 3 years, I have this deposit and be able to buy my first home. Bang, game over, man. Because you were saving $300 a week. Well, your rent just went up by $70, $150 because it will compound because more and more people will exit from that side. So if it compounds from that side, like, bang, now all of a sudden it stretches out to 4 or 5 years, you know what I mean, as a minimum. And it's just like, man, it's just going to get further and further and further away.
It's also a ripple effect. Like you talk about the effect it'll have on the market, the property market, but what about the effect on the wider economy? So government policy, it's such a ripple effect. You throw a stone and you think about all the countless ripples that sort of generates. Even like, let's say, for example, if investors left the market, even just something as simple as a property manager, if there's a massive drop in the amount of investment properties around the country, then you're talking 20%, 30%, just overall, you've now lost 30% of the property managers in the country.
Correct.
So you're not just affecting the property market, you're affecting all of the micro economies that are linked or connected or benefit from the wider real estate market. So property managers are just one simple example, but that happens across the board.
Yeah. Can we switch gears here a little bit? Because that's a really hot topic, and clearly I can, there's so many complexities to that, but there's going to be a portion of our listeners thinking about government policy when it comes to first home buyer grants and so forth.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for them thinking that this is something I should be capitalising on because clearly the government's going to give me some money? What would you say to them?
Yeah. So just taking a turn in the road, fork in the road, going down first home owner grants.
Yeah.
Man, first homeowner grants, I've got mixed feelings on because for me, it helped me get into my first property. I was an extremely low income earner, 38, 39 grand a year, whatever it was when I bought my first property. It took me 3.5 years to save, and then I needed the no stamp duty and I needed the first homeowner grant to get into my first deal. I think if that's the case and you're an extremely low income earner and you're in a location that actually makes sense that you can get into somewhere, and let's say it takes you 3 years to save 30 grand and you need the stamp duty exemption and the $10,000, $15,000 grant to get in, if you're in that situation, then I think it's warranted because actually that they're the people that it's for. It was that I was the person that it was for back then, making a pittance, you know what I mean? But the next phase of people who maybe they're saving, they're able to save 50, 60, 70 grand over maybe 12, 24 month time frame, something like that, saving hard and going hard towards getting their first home. I don't think it's for those people. Like, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. But if you're an investor or if you want to invest, if you want to build serious wealth, I don't think it's for those people because what you can do out there as an investor instead, multiply your money using the bank's money, leverage hard, all these sorts of things. A leveraged return will always significantly outperform a static, direct return of a one-for-one sort of thing. So I feel like when you can go out there and you can do something like that and multiply your money from that perspective, it's crazy, man. It's a game changer. We look at the portfolios we've done lately. You look at Bailey with his 60 grand and what he was able to do in that time frame with that amount of money.
Yeah.
Dude, he never would have been. You go out and buy his first home, he'd just be sitting there trying to pay it off, you know?
Yeah.
Created $500,000 equity in 12 months. Man, it's such, that leverage return is unmatched, it's unbeatable. So I think you've got to really understand your situation where you're at right now. If you're that super low income earner, if it does get your foot in the door of something local and that's all you want to do and you just want to chill and buy that and whatever, and it's going to take you 3 years, save your first deposit, and you need those grants to get in, go try and find something that maybe you can force a bit of value on. Spend time researching the market, buy something cheap, force some value on it, and then try and maybe pull that out as equity so then you can go and invest.
Yeah.
But if you've got the ability to go for something a bit better and go something somewhere else, because 999 times out of 1,000, there is a location better than where you live right now to invest that's going to give you a far superior return than buying locally and getting a grant and avoiding stamp duty and all the rest of it. They've scrapped most of those grants anyway. Most of the grants really are just for new builds. And at new builds, like, it's very hard to make money on that style of product. And you're going a lot of the time into cookie cutter style areas. So, man, I'm against it unless you really, really need it like I did right back at the very, very start.
And also, Lukey, what about for the segment of the market that says, you know what, I'll just use it for a year and then I'll convert that into an investment property?
Are you trying to put Burley out in the water? Yeah, it's 100%. It goes back to the purpose of the asset. Like, what are you actually holding it for? Is it a property that you lived in for 12 months because you were working there, but it's actually a great investment market? We actually had a few clients that have done this, and a good example of that was a client. He moved over to WA and he bought a property as
most people would know who Naaman is.
No, not Naaman. We have another client.
Well, Naaman did it as well.
Naaman did it as well. Yes, but another client that we had, he moved over there for work. He bought a property. He lived in it for 12 months and then he got moved to a different area and he held it as an investment and it was a great outcome for him. Great. So I wouldn't just blanket rule and say it's an awful idea, but you got to look at the asset. Is it going to perform? Are you holding it because
and
you
it's
just
case by case of where they're located as well?
Yeah, 100%. That's why you don't want to blanket rule it, but when you look at it, it's got to be purpose. You know, why is it in the portfolio? Is it going to perform? Is it going to do what's needed to get you closer to your goals? So a large portion of the time, though, it's not. And
999 out of 1,000?
Yeah. The
Something
largest
like that.
portion, absolutely.
So, what about one of the more positive policies for the government around SMSF and the ability for people to potentially invest and convert their standard retail super fund into something, a purpose vehicle that can actually generate them more wealth? So would you say that the government there's some good things that the government does for investing? Yeah,
I think the biggest issue with the SMSF route and the avenue that most people take is they just put it in a fund. Not naming anyone particular, but like I was with a pretty big fund for so long, and you'd see how much goes in, and then like it wouldn't matter what return they got you. In some years they'd be losing money, some years they'd make a little bit. They still take their pound of flesh, and they still smash you for it. And I think for most people, it's just like it's not. Well, actually, in my opinion, it's just not the best avenue for anyone. If you've got absolutely no idea what you're doing and you just nufty for sitting in there, whatever. But if you're listening to this, that isn't you. There are so many better avenues of what you can do with it. And again, we go back to the leverage return, but the leverage return of what you can do within SMSF, it's crazy. You know what I mean? It's the same as what you can do in your personal as well. And for me, man, it's a cool thing, and I look at it as like a side portfolio. And you always want to do something in your SMSF because doing something within that can be extremely powerful for your future. And it's something you can literally sit on the sides. And even if all you did was put it into 1 or 2 properties or something like that, even if that was all that you did, obviously we have a more comprehensive strategy ourselves, but even if that was all you did, then man, I think it can go a very, very long way to having a massive impact and changing your financial future.
The education around that, I don't know what you guys, if you're in your conversations, and you guys get the next stage when you're on the strategy sessions, right? But on the intro calls, whenever you talk about the possibilities and you just touch on it, a lot of people, I think it's ingrained in them. No, you don't touch super. You don't do anything in super. Where do you think that stems from?
It just goes very in and out of fashion. It's a very regulated industry. I think people are scared of it because they don't really understand it. But it's actually extremely simple. It's an extremely simple vehicle. There's intricacies to it, but like especially for the guys that are working with us, it's us working with it. It's so simple.
Yeah.
Lukey comes from the SMSF background. I've studied that thing back to front so many times. I love it. I think it's a great vehicle. And I think it's the old ostrich sticking your head in the sand, bloody just trying to ignore it. It's in the too hard basket. You're going to regret that at some point in your life. I guarantee you if you don't do anything with it.
If the simple way I sort of explain it to people, well, your property doesn't know if it's owned in your super fund or outside of the super fund. And if you believe in this concept outside of super, why wouldn't you adopt it in super?
Yeah, I think as well, like when we talk, obviously we have some pretty complicated or advanced strategies on this, and you can do some pretty cool things there, which we'll leave for off air. But when
School of Property, guys.
yeah, when you look at superannuation, all you really got, it's a very simple way of looking at it. Superannuation is a tax protected environment where assets can grow. Keyword there is assets. It's not shares, it's not property, it's not anything. There's lots of different things you can do in that entity or that environment, which is obviously very heavily regulated. It's got to be an investment. It's got to be, towards your retirement. But I say to people, and it's pretty similar to what Sammy said, I like to call it a complementary portfolio. You could have 5 million inside a super, but if you're not 60, you can't retire yet. So I make a bit of a joke and say it's like the cherry on top at the end. You have your portfolio in your own name and in the, what we do outside of super, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't touch it or shouldn't utilize it along the way, but it can't be relied upon if you want to retire or slow down pre-60.
Yeah.
So that's where the cherry on top at the end comes from, and that gives people the analogy or understanding that there's a lot you can do, but you can't benefit from it for a long time. So it's definitely a cool environment.
Getting educated is so important. When you see some of those ads for the super ads, and it always cracks me up because they calculate over 10 years, compare the pair, and one's like 35 grand more than the other over 10 years, and they're selling that's an amazing result. I'm thinking, are people like, they're taking the piss of people? Like,
but it's because they're appealing to the novices who all they know
That's
is
what
like
I mean.
that's their whole thing. I mean, like that's all they're going to have at that point in time. They're not looking for these leverage sort of returns. They're not looking outside the box. They're playing the safe. They're playing what they think is the safe game or the safe bet. But in my opinion, man, it's so far from that. It's not funny because, like, if that's all you're going to end up with, like, let's say it's $1 million, like, even, like $1 million in super, it's nothing by the time you get to retirement. $1 million is nothing. You need a continual passive income stream. And so that's where we really build them in a different way that's going to give you that lifetime stream of income. Man, and it's a crazy vehicle when you understand it properly. We won't go any deeper into it from that perspective, but yeah, man, I think it's good that I think it's good that the government, kind of makes you sacrifice from that as salary sacrifice. For most people, it's that contribution that goes in every single month. And yeah, man, it's a good thing. It's exactly what we're talking about there, a complementary portfolio for the future.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered a lot of points. Do you have anything else, Sammy, that you wanted to cover off on before we wrap up?
No, man. I think the biggest thing just to remember is focus on what you're in the game for. You're in the market. Fundamentals in the market will always remain. Different things will be brought in, taken out, all the rest of it, that will affect the market in both a positive and a negative way. All you can do is keep investing, keep moving forward. Don't let these things like bite into you, like make you worry like crazy. We literally invest we just play the hand we're dealt, you know what I mean? And we invest in that way. And if things need to change, it's all good. Being active and being active in your portfolio, not being a passive investor and just holding one property or multiple properties in the same locations for an extended period of time. You be active with your portfolio, man. You're always going to be winning. So it's not something that I ever worry about. I always bring it into my equations. I always factor it into account. But man, it does not stop me from ever wanting to invest. And if anything, a lot of the time I see the opportunity that comes from it off the back of it as well. And that's how you've got to be as a smart strategic investor that's always looking to build and to capitalize. You just got to be looking for the opportunities. So it doesn't worry me at all. And I don't think it should worry clients at all either, especially clients that are working with us, Australian Property Scout, School of Property. Like, you guys are going to be getting the continual updated information of how we're playing as each thing comes out to maximize the situation, not to get burned by it or to be stressed by it or whatever. There's always pros in any situation. So man, I'm not stressed at all. And I just think it's all part of the game and strategize. It means you're a better investor. Like, being stressed about these things, you need to go to the next level of understanding it, and then, okay, how do we actually benefit or capitalize or pivot in this scenario as well?
I think you bring up a really good point about opportunity. I mean, you think about Warren Buffett and when he likes to invest is when there's the maximum amount of fear or uncertainty, because that's where the opportunity presents.
Yeah.
So investors should really be thinking that the more uncertainty, the more opportunity for the smart money to be making some really good gains.
The best windows I've ever had were when big things were happening, like COVID, when COVID first happened, when those elections first happened, all those sorts of things, all those windows. I remember when APRA changes came in, I was buying in Adelaide at the time, and when when the APRA changes came in, the market just went dead. It was really weird. The market just like went absolutely like crazy dead because it was just like everyone was uncertain. Like, what does this actually mean? And I remember like when I bought those first few deals, the first one was like when it was just there was no one around. It was a ghost town. You know, it was crazy. And yeah, man, like COVID was exactly the same. Like the deals we got for some of these guys and that I was able to put into my own portfolio. All these sorts of windows of opportunity, that's exactly what it is. You know what I mean? Like, don't look at these things as like these big, scary events. Window of opportunity. Okay, sit back, like take a step back. Let's look at the whole picture. Where's the opportunity? That's what a great investor does.
Anything from your side, Lukey, while we wrap up?
Biggest thing is like that glass half full mentality. But the second one was pretty much a reminder of what I spoke about before, was to be aware of it. There will always be taxes, levies, barriers to entry. There will always be changes. There'll be things that happen in the market, things that happen with the government, things that happen with the ATO, things that happen with banks. They're all just barriers to entry. The people that can find a way around, the people that can overcome those challenges, overcome those changes, are the people that are going to, come out the other end, obviously, with a much bigger benefit than the people that go, it's too hard, it's too
risky.
Too risky, they're changing things. That must mean it's not possible anymore. Need to find a way to overcome any sort of challenges or things that pop up and persevere towards your goal, because there's going to be changes in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. They're all just going to be excuses along the way. When you look back when you're 50, 60, you're going to go, oh, well, the government in 2025 changed this law and that stopped me investing for the last 35 years. Like, it's something that you just got to overcome.
Ask your parents, if you're ever in that situation, ask your parents that obviously the next gen in front of you, probably 25 to 30 years in front. Do you wish you'd bought more properties 25 to 30 years ago, even when all the changes came in, all these things happened, the 2000, whatever that was, all these sorts of things, GFC, look at it since the GFC, man, like, all these sorts of times. Man, literally that's the easiest way to do it. And there's always a cycle moving, there's always somewhere growing. And there always has been, even in the worst times in history for the housing market. It's always been somewhere that's still been growing. So, man, that's just part of being an educated investor, strategic investor, and active, getting results, man.
I always think, will there be someone that will be making a lot of money in property in 10, 20, 30 years' time? Yes, they will be. 100%. They'll figure out a way.
And Jimmy's like, it's going to be me.
hopefully me. But so there's always going to be an opportunity, right? So for people talking themselves out, I think further to your point, Lukey, like you got to put into context, like what are you doing? It's meant to be hard. It's meant to be difficult. The barrier of entry is meant to stop people, but you just need to be that 1% to do the things that other people won't do in order to have the things that other people won't have. There's a cost and an exchange.
Yeah, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So, be aware of it, overcome it, tackle anything that comes up.
It's been a good ep, Sammy. I didn't know where we were going to go with this, but I think
it was worth this discussion.
I think it's great.
We got a lot of positive feedback off that ep around the negative gearing and stuff. And I thought, and a few people kind of asking about the policy changes and whatnot. And I know there's been a few nervous clients and whatnot too. So, man, I thought it'd be good just to kind of get it out there, how we see it, how we look at it, how I assess it. And what stresses me and worries me out, which...
Last question from me. Last question from my side. Trump has Make America Great Again. Yeah. What hat would you have, like in terms of your slogan? I know you've been saying a lot of the slogans. What would your slogan be when you're running for the top office?
I probably would need a few word checks on a few of mine that would be within it. But it'll be something about...
A few expletives.
A few expletives. There'll be a few things coming, but there'll be some big changes made, mate. All for the better.
All right, I'm in.
You're in?
Yeah, Lukey's going to be your advisor. He'll be
security. He'll be chief of staff.
Chief of staff. Kels will be...
marketing manager.
Marketing manager, PR.
PR and relations.
Yeah. I think we got some legs here, guys.
I think we
will.
Right in, let us know. Yeah. If you want it, let's see. I'll go for it. We're all getting stuck in last night. People were asking me. I had an answer for everything on the policy changes. Everything.
Well, and they were quite almost everything.
Oh yeah, what was the other one?
The health. What do you think of health?
I need some further information on that. I'll come back to you at a later date. Guys, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you took some great value out of today's episode. If you did, please make sure you send it on to someone else who also might take some great value, or potentially someone who's been stressing a little bit, potentially about negative gearing changes or government policy changes. Send it on, give them some context around what's actually happening out there and if they should be worried or not. If you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure you jump on, leave us a 5-star review if you haven't yet. And if you're not following us yet, please make sure you hit the follow or subscribe button on your favorite listening platform. And until next week, guys, I'm Sammy Gordon, joined by Big Jimmy Ibrahim and the monstrous Luke Teeuwsen. It's another Scouting Australia podcast.